Now, there were a couple of specific claims made referencing the highly selective use of the DSM definitions that I'd like to scoot through right quick. Comments concerning distress, the constant seeking of appeal, worrying about thoughts, actions, and I'll get to the vile, disgusting creature thing in a second. When we strip out the purple prose, which was used in this phrase, the highly emotive language, the sort of which I'm more accustomed to seeing in the poetry of 16-year-olds than in debate, we're left with a description of God as a point of personal accountability. Now, whether or not one views God existent, non-existent, valid or invalid, point to which one may be personally accountable. The functional relationship here is one of external accountability, which is implicit in social contract, which is implicit in collectivization, which is implicit in, well, any number of social or personal ideologies, theories, that do not necessarily hang on the existence of a God. The psychological arrangement of the relationship is identical. One has an external standard to which one holds oneself accountable. And perhaps we see a deviation from this in the idea that, first, this external point of accountability has intrinsic knowledge of internal operation of the mind. When we talk about, for example, accountability to collective, accountability to societal structure, there is not the idea present there that this external point of accountability is capable of checking these points, and yet we would still use the standard of this external point of accountability as a criteria for a reference internal point of accountability, wherein we constantly assess our own actions. In terms of the actual role in the decision-making process, however, these are functionally interchangeable ideas. Now, there are many other ideas attached to the existence of God, God's involvement in human affairs, so on and so forth, which go well beyond this definition. But within the confines of this definition, again, external point of accountability is external point of accountability. The vile, disgusting creature that needs salvation. I find it somewhat curious that you're presenting this as a majority position in Christianity, as what you're describing is actually almost a direct derivative of Augustine's proposition of absolute depravity, which he actually recanted later in his career, a decision which was ratified at Second Trent, when his later assessment of the human being as a blessed but flawed and intended creation of God was ratified as canon, but his earlier proposition of absolute depravity was ratified as anathema. So, again, I see here that you're I see here that you're presenting the case of your opposition which best fits your arguments, which it's shaky ground to be standing on, and I would hope that I would hope to be seeing less of that in the future. And to the point of preoccupation, a person who lives for Jesus, God is the only reason that we're here. God is the only reason for this, that, or the other thing. We've got a host of problems with this. First, there are people who say that. There are even people who believe that. And a still more exclusive group would be people who actually make decisions with the supposition that that is true and use it as primary criteria for their decision-making processes. and we need to recognize those three as distinct. Let's concern ourselves with the third case. In order to really make this argument, we have to describe the role that the existence of God plays as a foundation for decision making. The existence of God implicitly indicates preference for decision X in this situation where decision X is available. And further, we have to illustrate how. We have to indicate how the existence of God indicates a preference for this decision in this context. And further, we're going to have to do that outside of those contexts wherein there is direct inference, wherein God says, I exist, therefore do this. We have to see how a person would go about basing their own decisions on this belief in order to say that there is a causal link there. This is problematic because what we're getting at here is we're getting at knowledge and consciousness problems. And at this point, things scale in complexity far faster than I, at least, have time to spend on YouTube. But just by way of example, were this actually the case, were the existence of God an absolute predicate upon which decision is based in all situations, you're describing a human being with absolutely consistent and internally reconcilable motives absolutely all the time. And to the best of my knowledge, that person has never and will never exist. The person with absolutely consistent operators in their decision processes has never and will never exist. Because again, the structure of consciousness and the influences that weigh in on our decision making are just too numerous. And the last phrase I'd like to hit on here, and this one may just come down to a paradigm difference, two irreconcilable philosophies or approaches to philosophy. But the phrase belief in God is a false belief based on incorrect information. A couple of words that are particularly problematic, for me at least, in that phrase. False, based, and incorrect. False and incorrect for much the same reason, because the degree of certainty and absolutism implied in the use of those words strikes me as difficult to establish. Really difficult to establish. The necessary authority and elimination of variable for us to use words like false and incorrect. And based, again, we've got an implicit causal link, wherein we are, in this phrase, implicitly stating that belief in God is predicated on evidence or information which has been demonstrated to be incorrect. I don't think that people honestly sit down and watch a creation science debate and base their ideas on what they see there. I don't think that people build ideas primarily from imparted evidence. Again, we're entirely ignoring the experiential component of human consciousness. And again, here we're getting into problems like theory of knowledge, general consciousness-driven philosophy. That's well beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, but I do think it does have some bearing on the problems that we're dealing with. Perhaps we'll get around to dealing with those in another series of videos, or debating on Stickam, or what have you. But in sum, I think the main point here is, Brian, glad to have you back. Johnny, glad to have you back. And if you'll raise a glass with me for a moment, here's to character.